For millions in China, the Gaokao is the most important test of their lives. Fred Mednick is the founder of Teachers Without Borders, an organization working to remove barriers to education globally. He is also a university professor in Belgium. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you.
Well, let's begin some of the changes to the Gaokao this year. Chinese officials want the test to be more comprehensive with less rote knowledge. What do you think is behind that decision?
Well, a few things. One thing that has to be considered is the fact that the world is looking at transversal skills or soft skills as necessary in the workplace, and that just studying and getting good grades alone and high test scores may not be enough anymore for the modern workplace. There are also ways in which students are successful on tests and not successful in their careers, and do not do as well in colleges, which increasingly are asking for these kinds of skills. That's one move. Another is that the PISA exam, which is the Program for International Student Achievement, has shown in Shanghai particularly students achieving quite well on an exam that is wholly unlike the Gaokao exam and does test these kinds of problem solving and collaboration skills. So I think there's an evolution going on.
We're also seeing friendlier policies for rural students in China with changes within provinces to include more subjects. How significant are those reforms, and what does it say about why this test is evolving?
Well, there's a system that will be pretty much countrywide by 2020, and it's the 3+3 system, which is Chinese, mathematics, and a foreign language, plus 3 other kinds of choices, up to 12 combinations of physics and chemistry and geography and history. And these combinations are interesting because they reflect international realities. The testing itself, the questions themselves have changed to consider more global sensitivities as well. And so it's not a linear path anymore. That said, there's some pretty rigid stuff going on. There's lots of memorization still in the Gaokao, still a long and grueling test.
You know, there's so much pressure for young people these days, it seems, regardless of where they are, to have these perfect test scores, perfect grades, and a perfect resume. Do you think that has changed over the years, or are things simply getting more intense? And what advice do you have for students to cope with this pressure?
Well, the current coping mechanisms just show how intense it is. Some students are getting IV drips during studying. There's doctors prescribing birth control pills for girls, not to menstruate during the whole period of time. There are ambulances standing by. There's that sort of one log across the river sensibility. But at the same time, there is a growing openness to graft and corruption crackdowns. And they don't celebrate the superstars anymore. There are more regional differences. There is tuition waivers for medical school admission in the rural areas. But the problems remain and those tensions remain. And I think that everything escalates. AI, for instance, is entering in the picture where students are looking at recommender engines on how to study. So the stakes are higher. They're more reasonable in some cases, but it's nonetheless the biggest event in a student's life.
When it comes to standardized tests, do you think global attitudes are changing? Is it really a measure of a person's success?
Well, if you look at Hebei or Shanghai, you'd see 2 different kinds of countries there. Certainly in the research that we're conducting, either at the University of Brussels and around the world, the success of a student is clearly not the grades or the score alone. And we have seen the dramatic fall of a certain sense of willful optimism that should be characterized by teenagers as they go into college, of enjoyment of learning. And in many ways, much of this has been, for some, reduced to make it or break it. And but the pressures are great. The American college scandal itself has highlighted around the world what the extent parents and others will go to get their kids into schools. And there's far more regulations now about eliminating the Gaokao migrants to go to regions where there's, a little bit more lenient or fewer students to compete against.
Fred Mednick, thank you so much for joining us from Seattle. We appreciate your
Absolutely.
insight.